Welcome to the worship service of the First Unitarian Church of Hobart, where we strive to put love at the center of how we show up in the world. So, each week during our Sunday morning worship services, we join together in affirming that love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament. Service is its prayer. And this is our covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Since not everyone can attend in person, we are streaming this worship service online, and we extend a special welcome to all who are joining us virtually. The joys and sorrows portion of our service, however, is private, and we will temporarily pause the stream for that. Other than that, this worship service is being recorded and will be available for future viewing on our website. This morning, our minister, Reverend Tom Bozeman, will be preaching the sermon. Please turn off or silence your devices, and as you do so, allow yourself to enter sacred time together. And take a breath, and another, and join in the spirit of reverence. My heart is moved by all I cannot save. So much has been destroyed. I have to cast my lot with those who, age after age, perversely, with no extraordinary power, reconstitute the world.
All the ways that we have not sought the truth in love. May we forgive ourselves and each other, and begin again in love. And for all the ways that we have not helped one another, may we forgive ourselves and each other and begin again in love. And so I invite you to just turn and see these beautiful faces that are in this room with you. Maybe wave your hand, maybe smile at them if you feel so moved. Greeting all these folks, maybe some of them who seem familiar, some of them a bit more strange, but all gathered together to worship together this morning. And of course, the folks online as well, too. Good morning, good morning. And please rise in body or spirit and join in singing hymn 30, Over My Head. Seated. There's an opportunity whenever we join together in person, whenever we're on the phone with each other, whenever there's some kind of real-time interaction with one another, to share of ourselves, to offer of ourselves what it is that is stirring within us, either stirring in ways that are pleasurable or maybe not so pleasurable, or maybe we're not quite sure, maybe we're somewhere in the middle. But there's an opportunity when we gather to give voice to that, and to have that be something that brings us into relationship with one another. And so I'm going to come around the room with this microphone, and I would just welcome, if you have a joy or a sorrow to share with us this morning, just share with us your name so that we know who you are. Does any of you have a joy or a sorrow to share this morning? also in your order of service. Please be seated.
I invite you now to open a gray hymnal and join me in reading aloud responsive reading number 470 in the back of the hymnals. I will read the regular text, and I invite you to join me in reading the italicized text. We affirm the unfailing renewal of life, rising from the earth and reaching for the sun, all living creatures shall fulfill themselves. We affirm the steady growth of human companionship, rising from ancient cradles and reaching for the stars, people the world over shall seek the ways of understanding. We affirm a continuing hope that out of every tragedy, the spirits of individuals shall rise to build a better world.
So we are in the fourth week of this series, and as we've talked about in the past few weeks, it is a year of politics. It is one of those presidential election years, but of course, at the core of those political questions that kind of rise to the surface are deeper theological concerns, frameworks in which we think and even conceive of the world around us. Our Unitarian Universalist heritage has a number of different ways of articulating our perspective. One of them, in the words of UU religious educator Lila Ibrahim, it's a blessing each of us was born. It matters what we do with our lives, and what each of us knows about God is a piece of the truth, and we don't have to do it alone. Over the course of my time as a professional activist, I realized that while I had become really familiar with politics, what was missing for me was religion. As blogger Sarah Robinson wrote, while politics is about how we're going to make the world better, progressive religion tells us why it's necessary to work for change. We offer the essential metaphors and worldview that everything else derives from, the frames that give our dreams shape and meaning. And it's essential because all around us are frameworks that put at risk the global community of humanity and the many diverse people who live across this whole earth and the ecological systems of which we are a part. The framework makes all the difference. If we are given one kind of framework, then we read the story of Adam and Eve being placed in the Garden of Eden as one of humans being placed at the center of everything with the authority to rule over it all. And if we're given another kind of framework, then we read the exact same story as one of humans being placed among many other beings, their older siblings, with the responsibility to take care of and to be in good relationship with them all. We are the inheritors of what John Bjorns and Rebecca Parker describe as a communal theological house, built by those who lived, labored, and loved before us. Our social justice hopes have their origins in the ethical teachings of our own religious tradition. They are the same ethical teachings that gave rise to the movement for abolition and women's rights in the 18th and 19th centuries, the Christian social gospel of the late 19th century, which inspired the progressive era of the 20th, the civil rights movement of the 20th century, the Roe v. Wade case, which made it to the Supreme Court because of the activism of liberal church women. The roots of all of this are older than the fundamentalist movement. Ultimately, much of this comes back to what we hope for and how we hope for it. And so in the first week of the series, we explored the ultimate ends towards which we're aiming. In the second week, we explored our approach to being in community with one another. And then last week, we talked about sin and salvation. And this week, we are getting into the heart of theology. And so there are some questions that I would invite you to contemplate, to consider to yourselves. They're in your order of service. They'll also be up on the screen. One of them, is there any help for pain, for the disempowered and silenced, the abandoned? When everything human fails and nothing that is within the power of human beings to do can be done, what then? And is there a source of healing and transformation that will bring about justice in heaven or on earth? So these are questions that could fill libraries. There are entire publishing houses that just publish books every month that talk about these things. So we're not going to arrive at ultimate answers this morning. But just to start our conversation, to kick us off, I would welcome your just contemplation and silence for a few moments as Jeremy plays some music. And then once he's done playing, then we'll talk with our neighbors just very, very, very briefly about what came up for us in our contemplation. So just consider those questions silently to yourself, and then once Jeremy is done, then I'll invite you to talk with one another. So with whatever temporary answers or inconclusive thoughts you have in your head, I'd invite you to turn to just one person who's sitting near you, maybe two at the absolute most, and talk for 2 minutes about just whatever came up for you around these questions. Maybe it's your own questions. You don't have any answers. But 2 minutes, I'll let you know when time's up. Okay, thank you everybody for engaging, for considering, for wrestling with this together, for having some kind of thought or wisdom arise inside of you to be spoken aloud to the person as a sharing of your own being and contemplation and wrestling with the world. And so I'm curious, what's something that you either heard yourself say or heard somebody else say that stuck out to you?
It wasn't so much what I heard, it was the diversity of opinion, and it reminded me that nobody is in possession of the truth, but we all might have a little piece of it.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for bringing that in. Others, yeah.
We jointly felt the question created a problem. Is there help for pain? In that it seemed like it was too, have we failed? And that very asking the question about when everything fails, that seemed to be the problem, as opposed to using things on a continuum of working towards and not being defeated when you don't reach the ultimate working towards.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, others? Yeah.
I've reduced my spiritual practice to 3 principles: cultivate a clear mind, cultivate an open heart, and how may I help?
Thank you, Jerry. Okay, well, thank you for everybody wrestling with that. One last one.
Hi, my name is Lisa Marie. I'm an energy worker and a Reiki practitioner, and this question really relates to me deep inside in talking to you about your spiritual soul of healing yourself, opening your eyes to your heart and your soul, and you have faith to heal within yourself. You all can do it. It's just opening your eyes and getting that junk that's out there in the world out of your brains and seeing who you really are.
Thank you, everybody, for wrestling with it. Thank you to those who spoke up and gave it aloud, and to anybody who didn't. Thank you for being part of the energy and the contemplation in the room around this question. Now we've got a story.
This is an excerpt from The Rocks Will Cry Out by Rebecca Parker. A dream I had as a young minister showed me how difficult it can be to come to a new sense of God. In the dream, I am walking along a city street on a winter afternoon. The sidewalk is covered with gray slush, and passing cars and trucks spray me with dirty water as they charge through puddles and ice. I feel anxious and unprotected, so I turn down a narrow, dingy alley to escape the mess. Barely able to see, I make out in the dim light that in every doorway there are homeless people in tattered clothes, and that they all have lonely eyes and are shivering. One by one, they step out of their doorways and walk behind me until there is a small crowd. I sense their need and am frightened by their silence. Suddenly, the alleyway comes to a dead end at a brick wall with a door in it. I must either go through the door or turn around and go back through the crowd of suffering humanity. Both options frighten me. I choose the door, opening it and stepping through quickly. The door swings shut behind me, locked. In the claustrophobic darkness, a faint green light, like an illuminated watch dial, reveals the presence of an imposing person. I am terrified. I immediately see that the person wears a crown on which is written, king of the bums, the leader of the destitute is mute, but the green light is coming from the sign he holds. Letters spell out a message. God is so tender. Sometimes she is called green. The sense of God as tender, as fragile, as a new shoot of green life has stayed with me. And I also know that this kind of realization is more likely to happen when one has to actually face suffering. Perhaps the dream was a forecast of the journey I would have to make into the abandoned and mute part of myself, the outcast realms of my own being, the neighborhood in my own soul that I was afraid to visit at night. Perhaps it also indicated that, in order to be aware of God's presence, we need to pay attention to the seed of life that is present in different circumstances, in human beings experiencing homelessness and a lack of adequate food or clean water, who find ways to establish the life-sustaining ties of human community. What if God is our baby to bear? Annie Dillard asks in The Holy Firm. What if new life, the tender existence of the divine, enters the world through places where life is at risk and people must come together to create ways to tend to life with care so it will survive?
Please rise in body or spirit and join in singing hymn 391, Voice Still and Small. Please be seated. I don't know how many of you read fantasy fiction. There's been an upsurge of it ever since The Lord of the Rings came out, 20 years ago now, something like that, as movies. Of course, earlier than that as books. There's another fantasy author who was writing. He spent 10 years working on his book, and he heard that the Lord of the Rings movies were going to come out. And he said, "Oh, is it even worth writing my book anymore? The movie is going to be terrible, and then nobody's going to want to buy any fantasy fiction, and this is just going to go nowhere." And of course, the movie came out, and it was a huge success. And his book came out, and it was a huge success. And so things went not exactly as he had anticipated. There are a bunch of different lineages of fantasy history. The Lord of the Rings is one particular one. I don't know, have you heard of Conan the Barbarian? It's a few people. So that one came from the U.S. Lord of the Rings was written by a British author. Conan was written by an American author, Robert E. Howard. Have you ever read any of the Conan the Barbarian books? They're actually pretty good. I was surprised. I picked them up a number of years ago, and they're really well written, and there's this really powerful character and really fascinating stuff, and this whole world that he creates, and it's a completely different kind of fantasy than The Lord of the Rings. And so that's the kind of stuff that for a really long time I would love to read and get into and really just thrive on that being a part of my life. And just, it was enjoying life in general, you know, the friends that I got to be in friendships with, the relationships that I got to be in, going out to eat, just feeling successful at work, and things were going fairly well. And then there was this string of things that came up along the way. The first one being the election a few years ago, and then followed quickly by my father dying, which came about a month after that. And then a few months after that, I moved for a new job, and in the course of the move, the relationship that I had been in for the past few years dissolved. And I got to that new job, and in my very first supervision meeting with the director of religious education, she said, "I need to let you know this is going to be my last day. I need to go. I've taken another position in Utah, so I wish you well." And then a couple months after that, the administrator stopped showing up to work, and so we need to suddenly find a new administrator to fill that position. And that administrator was there for about 6 months before she and her partner moved out of town. We needed to hire another administrator. And along the way, I also had these doctor's appointments coming along to check into something in my thyroid that they'd been tracking for the past few years. And one doctor's appointment led into another, and led into another, and led into one surgery, and led into another surgery, and more scans and specialists, and on and on and on. And so it felt like the hits just wouldn't stop coming. It was very easy for me to thrive in my delight of Conan the Barbarian when my life was going nice and easy, and it was a fun little romp to go through. But it wasn't exactly something that I could turn to for solace. It wasn't exactly something that when I hit the skids in my life that I could look at and seek guidance. And of course, the author of the Conan books, Robert E. Howard, ended up taking his own life when he was young, because he was similarly not finding the answers, the solutions in his life to find a different way. When life is easy, it's easy to not need some kind of foundation to rely upon. And when things get hard, that can feel less available. Over the course of this series, we've been talking about different categories of theology. We've covered eschatology, the question of where are we going, what's the purpose of existence, what's the horizon to which our lives are oriented. We talked about the social gospel and universalist and radically realized eschatology, layers of that. We've talked about ecclesiology, how do we organize ourselves religiously, being communities of resistance, practicing covenant with one another. We've talked about soteriology, what saves us. Salvation not as something we possess or we earn, but rather something in which we participate through others and with others. And now things get a little confusing because the category of theology we'll be talking about today is called theology. It's one of those weird things where there's two different words with two different meanings, but they're kind of similar, but they're not exactly the same. So this week, the theology we're talking about is more specifically about God. When I was younger and people would ask me about what the heck Unitarian Universalism was, one of the things I would say is that, well, you know, we talk about God in worship services, but it's never with like a big G. It's always with a small g. This week I want to point toward thinking about that big G kind of God. Because as Rebecca Parker writes, the divine-human encounter is the rock on which our entire theological house stands. At the heart of liberal theology is a mysterious glimpse, a transforming struggle with the oblique presence of God. But of course, it's tricky to talk about God. Even the Bible itself, there's a lot of concern about idolatry and not making graven images of God, of not thinking of God in ways that conveniently conform to our own thinking and preferences. And so similarly, in liberal theology, at the core of the struggle with God is a restless awareness that human conclusions about God are always just provisional. They're always smaller. And of course, God talk has been used to hammer home expectations of obedience and invoked to stifle thought and reinforce oppression. So it totally makes sense that for many people, the word God stands for conceptions of the ultimate that have harmed life, have sanctioned unjust systems, or propelled people to take horrific actions in the name of God. In the light of all this, Black religious humanist William R. Jones has said, "If this is God, he is my enemy, and my sincere obligation is to fight him." And similarly, Jewish theologian David Blumenthal reflects that for many Jews it became impossible to accept the existence of God after the genocide of World War II. If God would stand by in silence as God's people were gassed by the millions, God either was unspeakably cruel, powerless, absent, or non-existent. So Rabbi Blumenthal argued that the only means by which human dignity can be asserted in the aftermath of the Holocaust is by fighting with God. In the past 2 centuries, there's been a serious cross-examination of God. It's been going on pretty consistently. For 19th century Unitarian William Ellery Channing, human life itself, above all, was a source of knowledge of God. This is part of his sort of cross-examination of the usual way of people understanding it, since every human being reflects the image of God, which is a key part of his belief. And he went on, "Whence do we derive our knowledge of the attributes and perfections which constitute the supreme being? We derive them from our own souls. The idea of God, sublime and awful as it is the idea of our own spiritual nature, purified and enlarged to infinity. God is another name for human intelligence, raised above all error and imperfection. We see God all around us because God dwells in us." And as John Burns notes, Channing's Imago Dei theology not only laid the groundwork for abolishing slavery, but also opened the way for transcendentalists like Theodore Parker to influence everyone from Abraham Lincoln, who paraphrased him when he said, "Government of the people, by the people, and for the people," to Martin Luther King Jr., who paraphrased Parker when he said, "The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice." And in the early 20th century, author Charlotte Perkins Gilman noted that a lot of our thinking about God seems to be related to men's experiences of hunting and killing, and that we might think about God a lot differently if we were to think about it in terms of women's experiences of giving birth. "Birth-based religion," she wrote, "would tell no story of old sins, of anguish and despair, passionate pleading for forgiveness for the mischief we've made, but would offer always the sunrise of fresh hope. Here is a new baby. Begin again." To the mother comes the apprehension of God as something coming. She sees God's work, the newborn child, as visibly unfinished and calling for continuous service. As the thought of God slowly unfolded in the mind of woman, that great power would have been apprehended as the life-giver, the teacher, the provider, the protector, not the proud, angry, jealous, vengeful deity that men have imagined. She would have been seen as a God of service, not a God of battles. There are plenty of unhealthy, idolatrous, traumatizing ideas of God. But once we dismantle them and let them go, it should make space for fresh discoveries to arise and new understanding to come of how it may be possible to speak of God in healthier ways. Once we understand those unhealthy ideas of God to be truly dead, what new encounter with divine presence might we be freed to experience? In Alice Walker's novel, The Color Purple, Her characters clear away that internalized oppressor that people often call God, and that frees them to come to a life-giving sense of God. Seeley writes to Nettie, "The God I've been praying and writing to is a man, and just like all the other men's I know, trifling, forgetful, and low down." Her friend Shug responds, "Ain't no way to read the Bible and not think God white. When I found out that I thought God was white and a man, I lost interest." You have to get man off your eyeball before you can see anything at all. Shug abandoned the image of God as an old white man in the clouds and tells Seeley that she has come to see God as it, as everything, as the connectedness among all beings, as the lover of everything we love. God seeks our attention, admiration, and love through life's beauty, diversity, and creativity. Trees, people, a field blooming in the color purple. Shug says, it always making little surprises and springing them on us when we least expect. When Rebecca Parker reflected in her dream, the one in which she got that message, God is so tender, sometimes she is called green, she wondered, what if the new life, the tender existence of the divine, enters the world through places where life is at risk, and people must come together to create ways to tend life and care for it so it will survive. Often it's precisely when people are suffering or in need of justice and compassion that God's presence can be manifest as people offer loving presence to one another. The sort of presence that heals and transforms, that reveals life to us in all its resilience and grace. Theologian Rita Nakashima Brock thinks of God in that light, writing, "This is how I can speak of God, as a presence gradually unfolded by life in its richness and tragedies, its devastating losses and its abundance, a power calling us into a fullness of living, a passion for life, for good and ill, an unquenchable fire at the core of life, glimpsed in light and shadows." Often, when people talk about God in secular society, there can be a coldly clinical or theoretical quality of the conversation. What evidence is there? What do the scientific discoveries tell us or not tell us? What do logic and reasoning bring us? What metaphors make sense to us? Each of those inquiries has their value, but they miss out on what Rebecca Parker calls the messy, painful dead ends, on the cold winter afternoons where life is exposed to the raw elements. It arises among the communities of those lacking bare necessities. It arises among the lonely, the hungry, and the frightened, and those without voice. In those kinds of settings, the question is not about metaphors or rational arguments. It is much more elemental than that. It is a question born of the suffering souls of human beings, and its meaning is a cry for hope. Is there any help for pain? Is there anything that will spring green from this bitter winter with its dirty ice and slush? Is there any hope for the disempowered and silenced, the abandoned? And when everything human fails, and nothing that is within the power of human beings to do can be done, what then? What then? Does God exist? Is there a source of healing and transformation that will bring about justice in heaven and on earth? This isn't just an intellectual exercise of, do you believe in God? It's a relatively meaningless question compared to the inquiry of the heart. Is there a reason to trust that there is any help available? And believing in the possibility of God is only a tentative first step. Beyond that is a matter of trusting that there is something or someone beyond us that desires us to be free, to be whole, to be joyful, that desires the thriving of life in its beautiful diversity and abundance, and that has the power in connection with us to heal, transform, liberate, and enliven our existence. To truly engage in this kind of inquiry, we can't just go with what we've been told. Religious tradition can show a path, and it can give us some nudges or some clues, but when a person or a community is up against the wall, facing a dead end in the alley, tradition at best serves to give us that nudge, to take the first step. And choosing to take the next step is an act of holy curiosity, Parker writes. In the course of our struggles for justice, one of the strange others that we may meet is a tender shoot of green, in response to which some of us will breathe the word God. But let's not totally set aside all those sciencey things. That's a key part of the equation. Up until Einstein and the birth of quantum mechanics in the early 20th century, Western science thought of the stuff of reality as tiny bits of hard matter that built up into structure. So this writing utensil, tiny bits of hard matter on the inside, and it builds up to a bigger thing. These pieces of paper, tiny bits of hard matter. Your right earlobe, just a tiny bit of hard matter underneath. It's all stuff squished together. I'd invite you to rise in body or spirit as you're able. We're not going to sing, but just to do a brief little thing that I learned. If anybody is familiar with contact improv, you might have done this before. But just notice in your standing where your weight goes. Is it a little bit more in the left foot? Is it a little bit more in the right foot? Is it a little bit more toward the front of your feet or the back of your feet? And as you're standing, maybe you're shifting a little bit without you even thinking about it. Maybe it's maybe it was in the left. Maybe it's a little bit more in the right now. Maybe it was towards the front. Maybe it's moving towards the back. Maybe you feel your shoulders shift a little bit, just so you're carrying your weight a little bit differently. Just notice as you are in this position, how your body makes little adjustments, little modifications. It's almost impossible to stand completely still. Okay, thanks for doing that little exercise. Go back, sit down again. So this embodied feeling of non-stillness isn't just a clue to how we humans exist in the world, it's also a clue to how the universe works. The universe is not still in any small or large way. Existence is not still. It is not constant. As Parker notes, in keeping with the scientific worldview of Isaac Newton, God's reality, originally, back before the 20th century, was imagined to be like that of an ordinary rock, solid, unfeeling, unchanging, able to affect other things, but not itself affected. And the predominant understandings of God at the time described God's nature as omnipotent, as impassible, as eternal. But once the science started shifting, all of that started to break down. The building blocks of the universe turned out to not be tiny bits of hard matter, but tiny activities. On the subatomic level, all that's going on are activities that are relational, that are interactive, and that are chaotic. As John Byrnes put it, what seems to us to be things are just packets of energy, related for a short time. They are events, they're occasions, and so are we. And any metaphysics or theology for today must reflect that reality. Mathematician Alfred North Whitehead took note of these developments. In the early 20th century, he was aware of what was going on with Einstein and with the quantum mechanics folks, and he realized that with the science shifting, the basic categories of Western philosophy would need to be reworked. The categories of mind and matter, subject and object, spirit and flesh had collapsed, and with them the solid, impassive God of classical theism had dissolved. As Parker writes, rocks are not what they used to be. Now we understand that inside a stone there is a vibrating dance of activity. From the perspective of process theology, God is the supreme being that can be called a rock, but a rock is an activity, not a steady state. All beings are actually events in process, which begins with feeling all other events, receiving and being affected by the vast network of all existence. Everything that exists as an instance of this process, a process that is relational, is ongoing, is creative, is emergent, is grounded in all that has been. As Burns writes, conservative theology often presents God as immutable, as having formed an unchangeable will for all that occurs. But I can never agree, he says. I am reminded of when the late William Sloane Coffin lost a beloved son in a car accident, and when a pious parishioner paid a condolence call, sighing, "Sometimes I just can't understand the will of God. Bill let loose, I'll say you can't." It wasn't God's will that the road was unlighted, that the car needed new windshield wipers, or that his son had probably had one beer too many. God's heart was the first to break, he sobbed. So in process theology, when someone suffers, God feels that and integrates it. And in process theology, whenever someone is liberated, God feels that and integrates it. In this understanding of God, Parker notes, we're constantly offered new possibilities and lured toward decisions and actions that will advance healing, advance liberation, and advance justice. And so my invitation to you over this coming week is to just go back to those questions that we talked about earlier that are in your order of service, and just to consider them in light of what I've been talking about this morning, and see what arises for you in response. Whitehead calls God the fellow sufferer who understands, the poet of the world, and the lure toward peace. And so in that question, does God exist? Maybe you'd answer yes, maybe you'd answer no, but either way, the answer can't be fixed because nothing is. As we know from the rocks, stillness is an illusion and motion is the reality. Beauty shimmers, dances, melts, and flows, and we can choose to open the door and cross the threshold into the mystery. And closing with John Buren's words, there is something solid if changing underneath it all. Despite every change, every chance of loss, to be upheld by a reliable foundation to shared living, this is to know God. Not the static God of classic theism, that God is dead, but a God who sustains shared hope as we reconstruct the connections beyond every human loss and challenge. May we continue in our searching. Blessed be.
We choose to welcome the Spirit of life when things are easy and when things get hard, with fresh discovery, new understanding of the lover of everything we love. Join in our aliveness and share our resources. This month, we are sharing our Loose Change for Social Change offering with a local Venezuelan refugee family that several churches in the area are helping to support. The Catholic Charities funding has expired. The parents are both working part-time jobs but need assistance still to sustain the family. They have a pressing need for the family of 6 for rent and NIPSCO and for the next few months. The children also have school extracurricular activity fees. Our loose change will go towards those costs for the family. As Unitarians, we believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Our principles call us to do all that we can to support those in need. For that reason, we hope that you will consider donating generously to help support this family during this challenging time in their lives. The money in the baskets goes to sustaining the mission of our congregation. The money in the cups goes to the local Venezuelan refugee family. For those not with us in person today, there is an online link for both one-time and regular donations.
Remind everybody that, the first 8 months of this year, you all raised over $4,100 for everything from the Hobart Humane Society to impoverished vets, the Women's Unity in Gaza, to the Pride Fest, to a battered women's shelter, Planned Parenthood, and to a farm animal collection.
Thank you, Pete. For your prayers, your presence, your service, and your gifts, we are truly grateful. Another way that we walk together as packets of energy related for a short time is by joining together for fun and fellowship, not excluding competitive bocce ball at the Farrell's house. And I did have an announcement. Is it over there? There it is. Okay. Just a few weeks ago, we celebrated 150 years of Unitarianism in this building. This milestone didn't happen on its own. We stand on the shoulders of generations who came before us in this church. The board has afforded us an opportunity for all of us to help plan and dream about our goals for the years to come, for the next 150 years, and help plan the steps it would take to get there. Your presence is requested at a congregational retreat on October 19th, right here at the church. Breakfast, including parlor donuts. If you haven't experienced parlor donuts, you really must. And lunch will be provided. Doors open at 9. Retreat starts at 9:30. See Sandy or any board member, raise your hand and sign up now. We need you all. Faith in Action invites the congregation to gather for breakfast at Jay's Breakfast Club in Gary this Friday, the 13th of September at 9:30 a.m., part of an initiative to explore and celebrate diversity in our area businesses and help to uplift businesses in communities that don't get a lot of support from customers outside of their community. See Pete, Cindy, Michelle for more information, or if you would like to carpool. We will be having a trunk or treat on Sunday, October 20th after coffee hour. We need volunteers to decorate their trunk, to hand out candy. We also need volunteers for games or crafts. If you would like to donate, we could use candy, items like bubbles, tattoos, rings, or coloring books. Oh, Fun. We also would like donations for a Halloween-themed basket raffle for any children who bring an item for the Humane Society to enter. So if you're interested in any of or all of this, please contact Ashley, Roz, Marianne, Michelle. Any of you here? Great, thank you, Marianne. And anything else I missed here? Horror and Theology starts Friday, September 27th at the First United Methodist Church with Pastor Leah and Miller. This will be, right? It's at her house. It's at her house, sorry. She's from the Methodist Church, but it's at her house, starting Friday the 27th. They will be covering midnight mass. So Fridays at 7:30, starting September 27th. Again, this is in your order of service. Water communion is 2 weeks. September 22nd. Please bring a small amount of water to celebrate the community that binds us together and the solidarity with the earth and all that inhabit it. So bring a small amount of water on Sunday, September 22nd. And I think that's it. Any more announcements? Now, please rise in body or spirit to join in singing hymn 86, Blessed Spirit of My Life. Closing words are also in the Gray Hymnal number 704 by Alfred Cole, paraphrasing John Murray. Go out into the highways and byways. Give the people something of your new vision. You may possess a small light, but uncover it. Let it shine. Use it in order to bring more light and understanding to the hearts of men and women. Give them not hell, but hope and courage. Preach the kindness and everlasting love of God. work on the encore. I invite you now to join me in reciting the italicized words to accompany our extinguishing of the chalice. May we continue to carry in our hearts the light of truth, the warmth of community, and the fire of commitment until we are together again. Please join us in the fellowship hall for coffee hour and fellowship.
And starting in 15 minutes, we'll do a discussion about the worship service this morning right here. Please grab a chair if you're able to join us.